Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal exciting details on Friday, August 15, 2025. First, Jason stood frozen in the dim half-light of his apartment. Joselyn's voice replaying in his head like a relentless echo he could not silence. The revelation that Britt was alive was both a piercing jolt of hope and a disorienting wave of disbelief that threatened to knock the ground out from under him. For so long, he had forced himself to accept her death as final, a truth he never questioned because it was too painful to reopen. He had mourned her in his own quiet, guarded way, sealing the grief behind layers of discipline and detachment. Now, that carefully built wall had been obliterated in seconds. Alive. The word burned in his chest, setting his pulse racing. But alongside the hope came an unyielding confusion that twisted like a knife. Why had she never reached out? Why let everyone who cared for her grieve in ignorance? There had to be a reason. And Jason's instincts told him it was a reason darker and more dangerous than anything he had imagined. The details Joselyn shared tightened his jaw and steeled his spine. Britt wasn't simply alive in some safe, hidden refuge, she was a prisoner. Held at an exclusive, high-security coastal resort by an unknown man whose identity and motives were shrouded in shadows. The image of her trapped in a gilded cage ignited a fire deep within him. Jason had been in enough hostile situations to know that captivity in such a place wasn't just about physical confinement, it was about control, manipulation, and isolation. A slow erosion of a person's will. He pictured her moving through opulent but locked rooms, watched constantly, her every word monitored, her every movement calculated to keep her compliant. It was an intolerable vision, one that left no room for hesitation. He knew then that this mission wasn't optional, it was a moral obligation. A promise to himself that he would bring her home and destroy whatever web of lies had ensnared her. Preparation began immediately. Jason moved through his apartment with methodical efficiency. Pulling gear from concealed compartments, laying out weapons, surveillance tools, false identification, and encrypted communication devices. Every piece of equipment was chosen for precision and adaptability, because a mission like this demanded readiness for unpredictable terrain and equally unpredictable human threats. Between each task, his mind flickered back to moments from the past, the way Britt's sarcasm could cut through his defenses, the warmth in her eyes when she trusted him, the stubborn streak that matched his own. These were not distractions, they were anchors. They reminded him why failure was not an option, why he could not allow whatever force had trapped her to keep her any longer. The resort's location posed its own formidable challenge. Jason studied aerial maps and security schematics on his laptop, tracing routes in and out of the property. It was a place shielded by wealth and influence, built to cater to the world's most powerful and secretive individuals. Security was layered, private guards with military training, state-of-the-art surveillance, restricted access points, and a surrounding geography that offered few natural cover options. It was designed to keep uninvited guests out and to keep its secrets sealed inside. Jason's eyes moved over every potential vulnerability, delivery routes, blind spots in camera coverage, maintenance entrances used at odd hours. He could already see the path forming in his mind: approach under cover of darkness, infiltrate using the staff's movement patterns, and blend in just long enough to find Britt before the inevitable confrontation. But strategy alone couldn't quiet the questions that gnawed at him. Who was this man who had gone to such lengths to keep Britt hidden? What did he want from her? Was she a bargaining chip, a target for revenge, or something even more personal? The thought that kept slipping in, no matter how much he tried to suppress it, was the possibility that Britt might not want to be rescued, that her silence was intentional. Perhaps she had chosen to vanish, to cut ties entirely. But Jason's gut told him otherwise. He had seen her fight too hard for her independence, her freedom, to believe she would willingly surrender it. Whatever the truth was, she deserved the chance to tell it herself, free from coercion. In the days leading up to his departure, Jason lived in a state of absolute focus. The world outside his mission blurred into insignificance. He moved through his preparations with the cold clarity of someone who understood that hesitation could mean death. Every scenario played out in his mind: what to do if she was heavily guarded, how to react if she was injured, how to escape if the situation spiraled into chaos. Yet underneath the calculated movements, there was a pulse of emotion that he could not extinguish, the desperate urgency of knowing that somewhere, she might be waiting for someone to come for her, someone she could trust not to give up. When he finally set his plan into motion, it was with the grim determination of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The night he left, the air was heavy with the scent of rain, and the streets glistened under the glow of passing headlights. He carried only what he needed, traveling light but prepared for war if it came to that. The path ahead would not be easy. The resort would not surrender its secrets without a fight. But Jason was ready to tear through every barrier, dismantle every lie, and face whatever truths lay in the shadows. Whether Britt greeted him with relief, anger, or something he couldn't yet name, he would bring her back. And when the dust settled, they would finally confront the questions that had haunted them both, questions that would change everything. Second, Curtis had always thought of himself as a man who could see danger coming before it arrived, someone who could read the shifts in a room and adjust before the blow landed. But now, standing in the middle of a conflict that had quietly transformed into a personal crisis, he felt the ground shifting beneath him faster than he could adapt. His alliance with Michael had been built on mutual distrust of Drew and a shared determination to remove him from the position of influence he had corrupted so thoroughly. It was a plan grounded in strategy and necessity, not sentiment, yet Curtis had come to see it as a lifeline, proof that he still had the ability to fight for something good. But the moment Drew's message reached him, everything changed. It wasn't simply a threat, it was a trap so precise it had been laid specifically for him. Unearthing a mistake she had fought to erase, a secret buried so deep Curtis had hoped it would remain untouched forever. Now it was in Drew's hands, sharpened into a weapon that could destroy her reputation and drag her into a legal scandal with irreversible consequences. The demand was chilling in its simplicity. Betray Michael or watch Stella's life unravel in public. Drew didn't shout, didn't rage, he simply laid out the terms in a way that made it clear there was no room for negotiation. Curtis could almost hear the unspoken promise in his voice: this wasn't just leverage, it was ownership. And Drew had every intention of holding it over him until the balance of power shifted entirely in his favor. The worst part was the trust Michael still placed in him. Michael had no idea that Curtis was now operating under a silent ultimatum, that every meeting they held, every whispered plan to corner Drew was being shadowed by the threat Curtis could not reveal. Michael spoke freely about strategy, timing, and the small political maneuvers they were putting into motion, his tone steady with the confidence of a man who believed his ally was unshakable. Curtis listened, nodding in agreement, all while feeling the cold weight of his duplicity settling in. To protect Stella, he would have to undermine these plans from within, feeding Drew just enough to keep him satisfied while pretending to remain loyal to Michael. The thought alone left a bitter taste in his mouth. Drew, meanwhile, played the long game with unnerving expertise. He reached out to Curtis with a smile in his voice, framing his orders as friendly suggestions, as though they were collaborators instead of adversaries. He sent the occasional message to Michael as well, carefully crafted to plant doubt without revealing his true intentions. It was psychological warfare at its most insidious. Each move calculated to deepen Curtis's isolation. He never pushed so hard as to provoke open resistance. Instead, he let the anxiety grow slowly, like a vine creeping through the cracks, until it became part of Curtis's daily reality. The man understood patience. And that was perhaps the most dangerous thing about him: he could wait for Curtis to destroy himself under the weight of his own conscience. Curtis began noticing subtle shifts in his own behavior, and they frightened him. He hesitated longer before speaking in meetings with Michael, avoided eye contact, and kept his answers deliberately vague. The once fluid exchange of ideas between them had become halting, interrupted by the unspoken truth Curtis couldn't share. Every time he looked at Michael, He felt a tightening in his chest, a combination of guilt and dread. He hated that Drew had put him in this position, but more than that, he hated that his silence was beginning to change him, making him into something he had vowed never to be. The man who had prided himself on loyalty was now entertaining the mechanics of betrayal. The nights were the worst. In the quiet hours, Curtis would replay every conversation, every subtle choice he had made that day, wondering if Michael had noticed the difference. He thought of Stella, of the devastation that would follow if Drew made good on his threat, and it was enough to silence the part of him that screamed for honesty. He weighed every possible escape from this trap, going to Michael with the truth, finding a way to discredit Drew before the damage could be done. Even attempting to outmaneuver him with false information, but each path was blocked by the same reality: Drew held all the cards. Any wrong move, and Stella's secret would detonate like a bomb. As the days dragged forward, Curtis felt himself being pulled deeper into a web that was no longer about politics or power but about survival. The mission to take down Drew had become something else entirely, a dangerous balancing act where he was forced to stand on the edge of two collapsing worlds. One was loyalty to Michael, a man who trusted him implicitly; the other was the need to protect Stella, the woman whose past had become the leash Drew now held in his hand. The longer Curtis walked this line, the more he realized that eventually, a choice would have to be made, and when that moment came, there would be no way to emerge without losing something, or someone, he could never replace. Third, Joselyn had never been the kind to lose her composure easily. But the sight that met her eyes that day at the resort's secluded terrace struck her with a surge of anger and disbelief she couldn't contain. Vaughn, the man she trusted to stand firmly on their side, was leaning in close to Britt, his body language laced with a familiarity that felt all too intimate. It was not a casual encounter, not a fleeting exchange of pleasantries. There was something measured, deliberate, and secretive in the way they interacted, as if they were sharing a truth meant for no one else to hear. Every instinct Joselyn had honed told her this wasn't innocent, and yet the fury came just as much from the emotional sting as it did from the suspicion. To her, Vaughn's actions screamed of betrayal. A calculated choice to withhold truths that could jeopardize everything they were working for. The moment gnawed at her in the hours that followed. She replayed the scene over and over in her mind, dissecting every glance, every subtle shift in posture, every faint smile that passed between them. Vaughn was supposed to be transparent with her, especially now, when the stakes were higher than ever. Instead, he had chosen secrecy, and with Britt of all people. The problem was, Joselyn had no context, no understanding of the layers beneath what she had seen. She didn't know Vaughn was embedded deep in a covert mission, one that required him to earn Britt's confidence at any cost. She didn't know that every word he spoke and every look he gave was calculated to maintain a fragile cover that could collapse with the slightest hint of mistrust. What unsettled Joselyn even more was Britt's very presence. As far as she knew, Britt was dead, her death a fixed point in the timeline of loss and conflict that had shaped their lives in recent months. Seeing her here, alive, breathing the same warm air off the resort's private shoreline, threw Joselyn's understanding of reality into chaos. This wasn't just a woman returning from the shadows. This was someone who had apparently lived under the radar, hidden from everyone, only to resurface in a place crawling with power, secrets, and danger. Joselyn's mind reeled at the possibilities. Had Britt faked her death? Was she a captive? Or had she been working with Vaughn all along? The resort itself offered no answers. Its serene facade masked a constant undercurrent of guarded exchanges and veiled agendas. Staff moved with professional detachment, guests with quiet authority. Each one potentially aware of more than they let on. Britt blended into this world seamlessly, her demeanor calm but not idle, as if she, too, were playing a part. That only deepened Joselyn's suspicion. People who hid in plain sight often had the most to hide. Whatever Britt was doing here, it wasn't a coincidence, and it certainly wasn't harmless. Inside Joselyn, a battle brewed between her training to stay objective and the raw sting of personal betrayal. Vaughn's proximity to Britt felt like a fracture in the trust they had built. One that she didn't know if she could mend. And yet, her instincts whispered that confronting him without understanding the full scope of what was happening could endanger not just his work, but their entire operation. The tension of keeping her emotions in check while trying to gather intel was like holding a blade against her own skin, one wrong move, and she'd bleed more than she could control. Meanwhile, Britt's behavior was its own puzzle. She moved through the resort as if she belonged there, but there were moments, fleeting, almost imperceptible, when her eyes darted, scanning the edges of the space as though aware of threats lurking just beyond the walls. Was she on a mission herself? Was she here willingly? Perhaps Vaughn knew something she didn't. Perhaps there was a reason he kept her in the dark. Yet, no matter how she tried to rationalize, the image of Vaughn leaning in close to Britt clung to her like a shadow she couldn't shake. It tainted every memory of their collaboration, every plan they'd forged together. Joselyn knew she couldn't let this stand, but she also understood that the truth, whatever it was, would have to be pulled carefully from the web of deceit they were all tangled in. Until then, her anger would remain a weapon, sharpened and waiting for the moment she could finally strike at the lies threatening to tear everything apart. Finally, Isaiah had been watching Drew's grip on Portia tighten for months, each moment more suffocating than the last. Drew's manipulation was subtle, the kind that made it hard to pinpoint exactly when someone was being controlled, but Isaiah saw the changes in Portia. He saw her make decisions that didn't sit right with the values he knew she held dear, her usual fiery independence replaced by hesitation and doubt. The worst part was that Portia, for all her strength, didn't seem to notice how deep she was sinking into Drew's trap. Isaiah knew he couldn't stand by and let her fall further into this cycle. She wasn't just being manipulated. Her help in pulling off a plan that had to be both strategic and invisible. Felicia listened, her expression hardening with each detail Isaiah provided. She knew Drew well enough to understand the kind of man he was, a man who played the long game. One who wore the mask of charm and charisma but hid his true nature behind layers of lies and manipulation. Felicia's mind worked quickly. And she quickly realized that the only way to break Drew's hold on Portia was to expose his lies and make him feel vulnerable, something he was rarely, if ever, made to feel. They would have to outsmart him, use his own pride and overconfidence against him. Isaiah and Felicia began working together, gathering intel on Drew's every move, to expose his schemes without him realizing they were setting him up. The first step was to get close to him, something Isaiah was already doing by maintaining the appearance of his loyalty to Drew. Felicia, with her cool demeanor and impeccable connections, started gathering the kind of information that could turn the tide. They needed concrete proof of Drew's manipulations. Something irrefutable that would force his downfall once it was out in the open. The challenge was to do all this without tipping off Drew or Portia. Isaiah knew that Portia would never willingly betray Drew, not without proof that he had truly betrayed her first. That's why Isaiah had to be careful, he couldn't show his hand too soon. He continued to be the dutiful partner in their covert operation, playing Drew's game while secretly setting the pieces in motion for his eventual fall. Each meeting with Drew was a delicate dance of words, pretending to agree with his plans while secretly feeding him just enough to keep him hooked. The tension between them grew palpable. But Isaiah kept his emotions in check, knowing that the moment he lost his cool, the entire plan would crumble. Felicia's role was just as critical. She used her network of contacts and her ability to read people to gather critical pieces of information. She was the calm strategist. And secret meetings that painted a picture of a man whose true motives were far darker than he let on. This was the key to their plan, exposing Drew's web of deceit in a way that would make him feel trapped, unable to wiggle free from the consequences of his own actions. She knew that Drew's ego was his greatest weakness, and they would use that to their advantage. The tension between their growing strategy and the weight of the secret they were carrying began to affect both Isaiah and Felicia. They couldn't afford to slip up, one wrong move, one moment of doubt, and Drew would catch on. And worse, Portia might find herself caught in the crossfire, torn between her loyalty to Drew and her need to see the truth. Isaiah's thoughts often turned to her, how she deserved to live a life free from manipulation, how she needed to be reminded of her strength. It was that desire to see her stand tall again, to free her from Drew's grip, that kept him moving forward. He could not afford to fail her. As the day of their plan's execution neared, Isaiah's anxiety mounted. They had done everything they could to make their trap perfect, ensuring that Drew's overconfidence would blind him to the impending danger. The next step was simple in theory but perilous in practice. They would give Drew just enough rope to hang himself. With all the pieces in place, Felicia and Isaiah prepared for the final act. They would confront Drew with the evidence, strip him of his power, and reveal him for the fraud he truly was. Isaiah knew that this was their only chance to break Drew's hold over Portia and expose the truth. As they set the final details in motion, the weight of what was about to unfold pressed down on Isaiah, but there was no turning back now. The trap was set, and Drew would have nowhere to run when the truth came crashing down.